The courtroom fell silent as Eliza Whitmore rose from her seat, her worn gloves trembling against the polished rail. Every eye in London's highest chamber turned toward her. The nobody, the charity case, the woman who had no right to speak. Across the aisle, Lord Ashford's attorneys leaned forward like wolves scenting blood. Behind her, Duke Victor Blackthorne sat rigid, his jaw tight, watching her gamble everything they'd fought for on words she hadn't rehearsed. 1 month ago, she'd been invisible. Now, if she failed here, she'd lose more than dignity. She'd lose the child sleeping upstairs, the family she'd accidentally built, and the dangerous man who'd somehow become her reason to fight. This was the moment everything shattered or held. Stay with me. Watch how a forgotten woman became unforgettable. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain hammered against the windows of Hartwell Manor like fists demanding entry, but inside the ballroom the music played on, a bright hollow thing that made Eliza's chest ache. She stood near the potted ferns, the same spot she'd claimed at every society event for the past 3 years. Her blue dress carefully mended at the seams where the fabric had begun to fray. No one looked at her. They never did. Across the room, Caroline Ashford twirled in her third dance of the evening, her laugh carrying over the violins. Her dress probably cost more than Eliza's family had spent on food this month. Eliza's fingers tightened around her punch glass, the cheap kind they served near the edges of the room, where people like her congregated. "Still here, Miss Whitmore?" Lady Pemberton's voice cut through her thoughts, sweet as poisoned honey. "I'd have thought you'd save your family the expense of these gatherings by now." Eliza met the older woman's gaze without flinching. "The invitations keep coming, Lady Pemberton. It would be rude to decline." "How charitable of the hosts." Lady Pemberton's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though I suppose hope is the last thing to die, isn't it? Even when it should." She swept away, leaving Eliza's face burning. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, it was the truth underneath it. Every event was a humiliation her mother insisted they endure, convinced that visibility might somehow translate into salvation, as if standing in the right room would erase the debts, the creditors, the reality that Eliza's father had gambled away everything except their name. And a name without money was just noise. "You're gripping that glass like it owes you money." Eliza startled. The voice came from her left, male, low, with an edge that made the hair on her neck rise. She turned and found herself looking up at a man she'd only ever seen from a distance. Duke Victor Blackthorne. He was taller than she'd expected, his dark coat impeccably tailored, his cravat tied with the kind of precision that suggested either a very good valet or a very controlled man. His face was all hard angles, his eyes the color of winter storms, and when he looked at her, it wasn't the way other men looked past her. He actually saw her. Her voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. "I wasn't aware I was being observed, Your Grace. Most people aren't." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that felt invasive. "You've been standing in this exact spot for 43 minutes. Haven't moved except to refuse 2 glasses of champagne from passing servers." Her stomach nodded. "You've been counting?" "I notice patterns." He paused. "And your pattern to disappear." The accuracy of it stole her breath. She should have said something witty, something to deflect, but all she managed was, "Is there a reason you're speaking to me, Your Grace?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or calculation. "Yes." He didn't elaborate. The silence stretched between them, heavy with expectation she didn't understand. Around them, the ballroom continued its performance. Laughter, gossip, the orchestra beginning a waltz. No one was watching them. Why would they? She was nobody, and he was... "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question. Eliza's pulse kicked against her throat. That's not... "It's a simple request, Miss Whitmore." He extended his hand, gloved and steady. "Unless you'd prefer to spend the remainder of the evening performing invisibility for an audience that's already forgotten you exist." The words should have been cruel. Instead, they landed like a challenge. She took his hand. The ballroom noticed that. Conversation stuttered, heads turned. As Victor led her onto the floor, Eliza felt the weight of 100 stares pressing against her back like judgments rendered without trial. His hand settled at her waist, firm and impersonal, and when the music began, He moved with the kind of confidence that made her missteps feel intentional. "You're not breathing," he observed. "I'm breathing fine. You're holding your breath like you're underwater." His gaze remained fixed somewhere over her shoulder. "Relax. They're already talking. Might as well give them something worth discussing." "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His eyes finally met hers. "Because I need something. And I believe you're desperate enough to provide it." The honesty was startling. No pretense, no flattery, just transaction laid bare. Eliza's training screamed at her to be offended, to pull away, but a different instinct whispered that offense was a luxury she couldn't afford. "What could I possibly provide you?" she asked quietly. "We'll discuss terms later." He guided her through a turn with mechanical precision. "For now, finish this dance without looking like you're being marched to your execution." "I don't." "You do. Your shoulders are up near your ears, and you're staring at my cravat like it contains instructions." A pause. "Look at my face. Pretend you find me tolerable." Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the acute awareness that this was somehow a trap she hadn't sprung, a laugh bubbled up her throat. She swallowed it, but not before he noticed. "Better," he said. "Almost human." "How generous of you to say so, Your Grace." "I'm not generous, I'm practical." The music swelled toward its conclusion. "Be at your residence tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll send a carriage." "For what purpose?" "For the conversation that determines whether you spend the next year as my wife or the rest of your life as a cautionary tale." The music ended. He released her, stepped back, and bowed with the same efficiency he'd applied to everything else. Then he was gone, cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk, leaving Eliza standing alone in the center of the ballroom with every eye in London on her face. Her mother found her 10 minutes later, fingers digging into Eliza's arm hard enough to bruise. "What did he say to you?" Her voice was knife-thin with desperation. "What did the Duke say?" "I don't know." Eliza's hands were still shaking. "I don't know what just happened." But she did know one thing. Invisibility was no longer an option. The carriage that arrived the next day was black as a funeral, pulled by matched grays that probably cost more than her house. Eliza watched it from her bedroom window, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. She'd barely slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Victor Blackthorne's face, that cold, assessing stare that had stripped away every defense she'd built. Wife. The word sat in her stomach like a stone. Her mother had spent the morning in hysterics, oscillating between hope and terror. Her father hadn't emerged from his study, which meant he was either drinking or hiding from creditors. Possibly both. The house felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of everything they owed, everything they'd lost. Eliza wore her second-best dress, the navy one with lace at the collar that hid the worst of the repairs. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling as she pinned her hair. The knock came at precisely 2 o'clock. She descended the stairs to find their housekeeper wringing her apron, eyes wide. "Miss Eliza, he says the Duke sent him." "I know." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley." The footman waiting outside was stone-faced, professional. He handed her into the carriage without a word. And then they were moving, the familiar streets of her neighborhood giving way to wider avenues lined with houses that looked like small palaces. They stopped in front of Blackthorne House. Eliza had seen it before, of course. Everyone had. It dominated its corner of Mayfair like a granite fortress, all severe lines and iron gates. The kind of place that didn't invite. It tolerated. The footman helped her down, led her up steps that gleamed with fresh polish, through doors that opened soundlessly on hinges that had probably never squeaked in their existence. Inside, everything was dark wood and darker silence. No warmth, no color, just wealth displayed with the subtlety of a threat. "This way, miss." She followed him down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men who all shared Victor's jawline, his eyes. They looked like they'd never smiled, never softened, a legacy of hardness passed down through generations. The footman stopped at a door, knocked twice, opened it. "Miss Whitmore, Your Grace." Victor stood behind a massive desk, his back to a window that framed him in cold afternoon light. He didn't look up from the papers he was reading. "Sit. Not please sit. Not thank you for coming. Just the command." Eliza's temper flared, hot and bright. "I'm not a dog, Your Grace." His gaze lifted. Something that might have been approval crossed his face. No, a dog would be more obedient. He set down his pen. Sit anyway. This will take time, and I prefer not to strain my neck looking up at you. She sat. The chair was leather, expensive, built for a man's frame. She felt small in it, which was probably the point. Victor rounded the desk, leaned against its edge, arms crossed. I'm going to be direct, Miss Whitmore, because I don't traffic in pretense, and I assume you're intelligent enough to appreciate clarity. How flattering. He ignored her. I need a wife. Not for companionship, not for affection, for a very specific legal purpose. In exchange for this service, I'm prepared to pay off your family's debts in their entirety and provide you with an annual income that will ensure you never have to stand at the edge of a ballroom pretending you don't exist. The room tilted. Eliza's fingers dug into the chair arms. Why me? Because you're desperate, unattached, and unlikely to develop romantic delusions about our arrangement. His tone was clinical. You're also intelligent enough to understand the terms and practical enough to honor them. You don't know me. I know enough. You've attended 63 social events in the past 2 years. Never danced, rarely spoke, never caused scandal. You're overlooked, which makes you useful. And your family's situation is dire enough that refusal isn't a realistic option. He was right. That was the worst part. Every word was accurate, but accuracy didn't make it easier to swallow. What's the legal purpose? She asked. Victor's expression hardened. I have a niece, 8 years old. Her mother, my sister, died 6 months ago. Her father followed 3 months later. The child's care became my responsibility. And you need a wife to maintain that custody? The courts prefer children in traditional family structures. My cousin, Lord Edmund Ashford, has challenged my guardianship, arguing that a bachelor, particularly one with my reputation, is unsuitable. A marriage eliminates his legal standing. Eliza's mind raced. Lord Ashford is doing this for money. Obviously, the child inherits her parents' estate when she comes of age. Until then, her guardian controls those assets. Victor's jaw tightened. Edmund would bleed the estate dry within a year and leave her with nothing. And you wouldn't? His eyes flashed. I don't need her money, Miss Whitmore. I have enough of my own. The vehemence surprised her. This wasn't just strategy. There was something personal underneath, something raw. She filed that away. What happens after? She asked. After the custody is secured? We maintain appearances for a year, perhaps 2, long enough to establish stability. After that, you're free to live as you choose, separately if you prefer. The financial arrangements remain regardless. So I'd be bought. We'd both be getting what we need. He straightened. I'm not offering romance, Miss Whitmore. I'm offering survival, yours and the child's. Eliza stood, her legs unsteady. She walked to the window, stared out at the manicured gardens below. Somewhere in this vast, cold house was a little girl who'd lost everything. Somewhere across London, her own family teetered on the edge of ruin. I want to meet her, she said. The child, before I agree. Silence. When she turned, Victor was watching her with that unreadable expression. Why? Because if I'm going to lie to a court, to society, to everyone, if I'm going to sell myself for my family's sake, I need to know it's for something more than just money. Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. I need to know she's real. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he nodded, once. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. I'll have her brought to the drawing room. I'll be here, Miss Whitmore. His voice stopped her at the door. This arrangement is transactional. Don't mistake it for anything else. She looked back at him, this hard, controlled man who'd reduced her life to terms and conditions. I won't, Your Grace, as long as you remember the same. The carriage ride home was a blur. When Eliza walked through her front door, her mother was waiting, face white. Well? Eliza met her eyes. He wants to marry me. Her mother's shriek of joy could probably be heard 3 streets over. But that night, lying in bed, Eliza didn't feel triumphant. She felt like she'd stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to hit the ground. Tomorrow she'd meet the child. Tomorrow she'd decide if she could live with becoming someone's bargaining chip. Tomorrow, everything changed, one way or another. The rain started again just past midnight, hammering against her window like it had something to say. Eliza pulled her thin blanket tighter and listened to the storm, wondering if she'd just agreed to walk into one worse than anything nature could manufacture. Probably, But at least she wouldn't be invisible anymore. The drawing room at Blackthorn House was exactly what Eliza expected. Ornate furniture arranged with mathematical precision, paintings worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and windows so tall they made the gray London sky look like something framed for display. She sat on a settee that probably cost what her family spent on rent for 6 months, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Victor stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid as iron. He hadn't said more than 3 words since she'd arrived, just gestured toward the seat and returned to his silent vigil. The clock on the mantel ticked like a countdown. The door opened. A woman entered first, gray-haired, stern-faced, her black dress marking her as either upper staff or professional mourner. Behind her came a small figure in a white pinafore dress, dark curls pulled back so tight they had to hurt, her face scrubbed clean and utterly expressionless. The child didn't look at Eliza, didn't look at Victor. She stared at a spot on the carpet like she'd been instructed to stand there and disappear. "Miss Clara Thornfield," the woman announced, her voice flat. "As requested, Your Grace." Victor's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Givens. You may wait outside." "I don't think—" "Outside." The word cracked like a whip. Mrs. Givens' mouth thinned, but she left, closing the door with slightly more force than necessary. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Clara still hadn't moved. 8 years old, Victor had said, but she looked smaller, breakable, like someone had taken everything soft about childhood and scrubbed it away until only this hollow-eyed doll remained. Eliza's chest ached. "Clara," Victor said, his voice gentler than Eliza had heard it. "This is Miss Whitmore. She's... He stopped, seemed to search for words, found none. "We're going to be married," Eliza finished quietly. "Your uncle and I." Clara's gaze finally lifted. Her eyes were enormous, the color of amber, and completely devoid of hope. "Why?" The child's voice was barely a whisper. Victor stiffened. "Because it's necessary for—" "Because he needs help," Eliza interrupted, earning a sharp look from Victor. "And so do I. So we're helping each other. Does that make sense?" Clara studied her with the intensity of someone much older. "You need money." The bluntness startled a laugh out of Eliza. "Yes, I need money. And your uncle needs—" She glanced at Victor, saw warning in his eyes, ignored it. "He needs to make sure you're safe, that you stay with him and not with someone who might hurt you. Lord Edmund, you know about that?" "I hear things." Clara's small hands twisted in her pinafore. "The servants talk. They think I don't understand, but I do. Lord Edmund wants my papa's money. Uncle Victor wants to stop him." Victor made a rough sound. "Clara, you shouldn't—" "It's true, isn't it?" The child's voice cracked slightly. "Everything is about money. Mama said money is why Papa worked so much. Why they fought. Why—" She stopped, her throat working. Eliza's heart broke cleanly in half. She slid off the settee, knelt on the expensive carpet despite the way it would crease her dress, until she was eye level with this tiny, damaged girl. "You're right," she said softly. "Money is part of it, but that's not all of it." Clara's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Then what?" "Your uncle wants you to have a home, a real one, not just a place where you're kept safe, but where you belong." Eliza kept her voice steady, even though her own throat was tight. "And I want to help with that, if you'll let me." "Why?" Clara asked again, fiercer this time. "You don't know me. Why would you care?" "Because I know what it's like to be invisible," Eliza thought, "to stand in rooms full of people and feel utterly alone, to understand that no one sees you unless you're useful." But she couldn't say that to a child. "Because someone should," she said instead, "and maybe I can be that someone, if you're willing to give me a chance." The silence stretched. Clara looked at Victor, then back at Eliza, some calculation happening behind those 2 old eyes. "Will you live here?" the child asked. "Yes." "With Uncle Victor?" "Yes." "Will you—" Clara's voice dropped so low Eliza almost missed it. "Will you leave? After? Like everyone else?" The question landed like a physical blow. Eliza glanced up at Victor and saw his face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a man who'd learned not to feel things. She looked back at Clara. "I don't know what's going to happen after, but I promise you this. While I'm here, I won't pretend you don't exist. I'll see you, every day. Does that help? Clara's chin trembled. Then, so quietly, Eliza almost didn't hear it. Okay. It wasn't trust, it wasn't even close. But it was a crack in the wall, and Eliza would take it. She stood, her knees protesting, and found Victor watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Mrs. Givens will return you to the nursery, he told Clara. We'll speak more at dinner. Clara nodded, started toward the door, then stopped. She turned back, looking at Eliza. My mama used to wear blue, she said, like your dress. She said it made her feel brave. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Eliza stood frozen, her vision blurring. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of Victor. That, he said quietly, was not the conversation I expected you to have. What did you expect? Platitudes. Distance. He moved away from the fireplace, closer. Not honesty. She deserved honesty. She's 8. She's 8, and she's already learned that adults lie. Eliza met his gaze. I won't be one more person who does that to her. Something shifted in Victor's expression. The marriage contract will be drawn up by week's end. The ceremony can be arranged for 2 weeks after, pending your agreement to terms. I agree. He raised an eyebrow. You haven't heard the terms. I don't need to. Eliza's hands were steady now. You'll pay my family's debts, provide me an income, and expect me to play the dutiful wife in public while staying out of your way in private. I'll have my own rooms, my own life within these walls, and when the time comes, we'll part ways with minimal fuss. She paused. Did I miss anything? You're remarkably cynical for someone so young. I'm remarkably practical for someone so desperate. She started toward the door, then stopped. One more thing, Your Grace. That woman, Mrs. Givens, she's cruel to Clara. I could see it in the way the child looked at her. Victor's expression shuddered. Mrs. Givens is highly recommended. She has impeccable credentials. She also has a mean streak. The child is terrified of her. You spent 5 minutes with Clara. You can't possibly... I saw enough. Eliza's voice hardened. If you want this marriage to appear legitimate, if you want the courts to believe we're providing a loving home, then you can't have that woman treating your niece like an inconvenience. And what would you suggest? Fire her. Find someone kind. Someone who remembers that Clara is a little girl who's lost everything, not a problem to be managed. Victor's jaw worked. You're overstepping. Then consider it practice for being your wife. She pulled open the door. I'll see you at the ceremony, Your Grace. She made it to the carriage before the shaking started, made it home before the full weight of what she'd agreed to crashed down on her shoulders. Her mother was waiting in the parlor, practically vibrating with anticipation. Well, what happened? Did you see the house? What did he say? Eliza sank into a chair that wobbled on uneven legs. We're getting married in 2 weeks. He'll settle all our debts immediately. It's done. Her mother burst into tears, the good kind, the relieved kind. Her father emerged from his study looking 10 years younger, the permanent crease between his brows smoothing out. They talked about the wedding, about what people would say, about the miracle of their salvation. Eliza sat silent through all of it, thinking about a small girl in a too-white dress who'd learned that the world ran on money and cruelty. Not on her watch. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of fittings and paperwork and increasingly surreal conversations with solicitors who spoke about her future like she wasn't in the room. The marriage contract was 37 pages long. Eliza read every word. Victor was as good as his word. Her family's creditors were paid off within days, the relief on her father's face almost painful to witness. Her mother commissioned a wedding dress they actually couldn't afford, but Eliza didn't have the heart to stop her. Let her have this. Let her pretend this was a real wedding, a real future. Eliza knew better. The ceremony was held at Blackthorn House, small and efficient. No flowers, no music beyond what the hired organist played mechanically through the vows. Eliza wore the white dress her mother had wept over. Victor wore black, and they spoke words that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. Clara watched from the front row, her face unreadable. When the officiant pronounced them married, Victor kissed Eliza's cheek with all the warmth of someone fulfilling a contract obligation, which she supposed he was. "Welcome to the family, Your Grace," he murmured, quiet enough that only she could hear. "Don't call me that," she whispered back. "It's your title now." "It's not mine. It's borrowed. She pulled back, met his eyes. Just like everything else in this arrangement. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or reluctant respect. Before he could respond, they were surrounded by the handful of witnesses offering hollow congratulations. Eliza smiled until her face hurt. That night, Victor showed her to her rooms, a suite in the east wing, far enough from his quarters to make the separation clear. The bedroom was larger than her entire childhood home, decorated in shades of cream and gold that probably cost more than she wanted to calculate. "Mrs. Holloway will serve as your lady's maid," Victor said from the doorway, his voice formal. "If you need anything, inform the staff." "Where's Clara?" Eliza asked. "In the nursery, 3rd floor, west wing." "And Mrs. Givens?" His expression hardened. "Gone. As of yesterday. I've hired a new governess, Miss Anne Pritchard. She comes with excellent references and, as you specified, a reputation for kindness." Eliza's breath caught. "You listened. I considered your argument and found it had merit." He straightened his cuffs, not meeting her eyes. "Don't make a habit of expecting it." "Noted." She paused. "Thank you. Don't thank me for doing what's necessary for the case." He turned to leave, stopped. "We travel to Thornhill Abbey in 3 days, my northern estate. The custody hearing is in 6 weeks, and we need to establish the marriage as legitimate before then. That means being seen together, appearing—" He searched for a word. "Tolerable of each other?" Eliza supplied dryly. "Convincing." His gaze was sharp. "Can you manage that?" "Can you?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I suppose we'll find out." The door closed behind him, leaving Eliza alone in her gilded cage. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass, and tried to remember how to breathe. She'd done it. Traded herself for her family's future, for a child's safety, for survival. Now she just had to figure out how to live with it. 3 days later, they departed for Thornhill Abbey in a carriage loaded with trunks and tension. Clara sat across from Eliza, silent and watchful. Victor rode separately on horseback, claiming business that couldn't wait. Really, Eliza suspected, he just couldn't stand to be trapped in a confined space with his new family. The journey north took 2 days. They stopped at an inn the first night, and Eliza found herself sharing a room with Clara while Victor took separate quarters. The child had barely spoken since London, but as Eliza helped her into her nightdress, Clara's small voice broke the silence. "Do you love him?" Eliza's hand stilled on the buttons. "Your uncle?" "Yes." She could lie, should lie, probably, to maintain the illusion. But Clara had asked for honesty, and Eliza had promised to give it. "No," she said quietly. "I don't love him. We barely know each other." "Then why did you marry him?" "Because sometimes we do things we don't want to do to protect the people we care about." Eliza finished the last button, turned Clara around. "My family needed help. Your uncle needed help. We helped each other." "That's sad," Clara whispered. "Maybe." Eliza brushed a curl from the child's forehead. "But it doesn't have to stay sad. Sometimes things get better. We just have to wait and see." Clara climbed into bed, her amber eyes serious. "Miss Pritchard is nice. She doesn't grab my arm when I'm slow. And she reads to me at night, stories about girls who go on adventures." Relief flooded Eliza's chest. "I'm glad." "Are you going on an adventure?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "You married Uncle Victor and came to live in a new house, and now we're going to another new house." Clara pulled the blankets up to her chin. "That sounds like an adventure. The start of one, anyway." Eliza's throat tightened. "You know what? You're right. It is an adventure, and we're on it together." "Will it have a happy ending?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I'm going to try my best to make sure it does." Clara studied her for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood. Eliza sat in the chair by the window and watched the darkness outside, wondering what kind of adventure she'd actually signed up for. Thornhill Abbey appeared on the horizon like something out of a nightmare. All gray stone and sharp towers perched on a hill overlooking miles of bleak northern countryside. The sky was the color of old bruises, the wind fierce enough to rattle the carriage windows. "It's big," Clara said, her first words in hours. "It's hideous," Eliza muttered, then caught herself. I mean, it's very imposing. Clara giggled, an actual real giggle that transformed her face. It's hideous. Uncle Victor says it was built by an ancestor who hated people and wanted to make sure everyone knew it. Despite herself, Eliza laughed. Well, he succeeded. Victor was waiting at the entrance, his dark coat whipping in the wind. He looked like he belonged here, harsh, unyielding, carved from the same stone as the building behind him. "Welcome to Thornhill," he said as a footman helped them down. "I apologize for the weather. It's generally miserable this time of year." "How cheerful," Eliza said. His eyes met hers, and she could swear she saw amusement there. "The staff is assembled inside. You'll need to meet them. Establish your authority as mistress of the house." "My authority?" She raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware I had any. You're the Duchess now. They answer to you." He paused. "Try not to fire everyone in the first week. Only if they deserve it." He almost smiled. Almost. The interior of Thornhill was exactly as cold as Eliza expected, all dark corridors and rooms that looked like no one had touched them in decades. The staff lined up in the entrance hall, a row of suspicious faces that tracked her every movement. Victor made perfunctory introductions. Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper, a woman built like a brick wall with a face to match. Mr. Graves, the butler, ancient and disapproving. A parade of maids and footmen whose names blurred together. "Mrs. Brennan will show you to your rooms," Victor said. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." Then he was gone, his boots echoing away down some corridor, leaving Eliza alone with the woman who clearly resented her existence. "This way, Your Grace." Mrs. Brennan's voice could have frozen water. "Mind the floors, they're original stone and quite slippery." The rooms she'd been given were in the same wing as Victor's, close enough to maintain appearances, far enough for actual distance. The bedroom was huge, dominated by a four-poster bed that looked like it had witnessed centuries of unhappy marriages. "His Grace's rooms are through that door," Mrs. Brennan said, gesturing to a connecting door. "Should you need anything from him?" The emphasis on anything made Eliza's skin crawl. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. That will be all." The housekeeper's mouth thinned. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but there are household matters we should discuss. Menus, staffing schedules. Tomorrow." Eliza kept her voice level. "I'd like to settle in first." The previous Duchess, His Grace's mother, always handled such matters immediately upon arrival. She believed in establishing order from the outset. "I'm not the previous Duchess." Clearly, the word dripped with disdain. Eliza's temper, already frayed from 2 days of travel and a lifetime of being underestimated, snapped. "Mrs. Brennan, I understand this is an adjustment for you. But let's be clear, I am the Duchess of Thornhill now, whether you approve or not. I will run this household as I see fit, when I see fit. If that's unacceptable to you, I'm sure there are other positions available elsewhere." The housekeeper's face flushed red. "I've served this family for 30 years. Yeah. Then you should know better than to disrespect its current Duchess." Eliza met her gaze without flinching. "We can work together, or we can be enemies. Your choice. But choose quickly, because my patience has limits." Silence. Mrs. Brennan's jaw worked, fury and shock battling across her features. Finally, she dropped into a stiff curtsy. "Yes, Your Grace." "Good. Now leave. I'll ring if I need you." The door closed with barely controlled force. Eliza's knees nearly gave out. She sank onto the bed, her hands shaking with adrenaline. That had been incredibly stupid. Alienating the housekeeper on day one was not the strategic move a smart woman would make. But she was so tired of being dismissed, of being nothing. A knock interrupted her spiral. The connecting door, Victor's door, opened before she could respond. He stood in the doorway, still in his traveling clothes, his expression unreadable. "I heard," he said. "I don't care." Eliza stood squaring her shoulders. She was insubordinate. She was testing you to see if you'd fold. "I don't fold." "I'm beginning to see that." He stepped into the room, and suddenly the massive space felt smaller. "Mrs. Brennan has run this house since before I was born. She's loyal, competent, and utterly ruthless to anyone she perceives as weak. And you're telling me this now because I need you to understand. Thornhill is not London. The rules here are different, harder. His gaze was intense. You just made an enemy of the most powerful person in this house besides me. Then I'll deal with it. How? I don't know yet. Eliza lifted her chin. But I'll figure it out. I always do. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, incredibly, his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. You might actually survive this, he said quietly. Was there doubt? Considerable doubt. He turned to leave, paused at the threshold. Dinner's in an hour. Try not to declare war on the cook before then. The door closed. Eliza stood alone in her borrowed room in her borrowed life and felt something strange bloom in her chest. Not hope. Hope was dangerous. But maybe possibility. That night at dinner, Victor watched Eliza across the long table and tried to reconcile the woman in front of him with the invisible creature he'd selected 2 weeks ago. She sat with her spine straight, her chin up, meeting his gaze without the deference everyone else showed him. Clara, seated between them, was actually eating instead of pushing food around her plate. Miss Pritchard says we can start French lessons next week, the child announced, her voice still quiet but less hollow than before. If that's acceptable. More than acceptable, Eliza said before Victor could respond. French is useful. What else are you studying? History, mathematics, deportment. Clara made a face at the last word. Deportment is important, Victor said automatically. Deportment is boring, Eliza countered, earning a surprised look from Clara. But unfortunately necessary. Tell you what, you suffer through deportment and I'll convince your uncle to let you have writing lessons. Clara's eyes went wide. Really? I didn't agree to that, Victor said. You haven't disagreed yet either. Eliza's smile was sharp. Clara, would you like to learn to ride? Yes! The child's enthusiasm was so sudden, so bright, it hurt to witness. Victor found himself cornered by 2 pairs of eyes, one amber, one blue, both defiant. Fine, he said. Writing lessons. But only if Miss Pritchard reports satisfactory progress in your other studies. Clara actually grinned. Victor's chest did something uncomfortable. After dinner, after Clara had been taken up to the nursery, Victor found Eliza in the library. She was running her fingers along the spines of books that probably hadn't been touched in years. You're good with her, he said. Eliza didn't turn around. She's easy to be good to. She just needs someone to actually see her. And you do. See her. Yes. She pulled out a volume, examined its cover. Is that a problem? No. Victor moved closer. I just didn't expect it. What did you expect? That I'd ignore her? Treat her like furniture? I expected you to maintain professional distance, to fulfill your contractual obligations without getting involved. Now she did turn, her eyes sharp. I'm living in your house, married to you in the eyes of the law and society, responsible for helping you maintain custody of a traumatized child. How exactly am I supposed to do that without getting involved? Other women would manage it. Then you should have married one of them. She shoved the book back onto the shelf. But you didn't. You married me, so you get me, complications and all. The firelight caught in her hair, turned it copper and gold. She looked nothing like the invisible woman from the ballroom. She looked vivid, real, dangerous in a way he hadn't anticipated. The hearing is in 5 weeks, he said, forcing his mind back to strategy. Lord Edmund's attorneys will do everything possible to discredit our marriage. They'll look for cracks, inconsistencies. Anything that suggests this is an arrangement rather than a genuine union. So we don't give them any cracks. It's not that simple. Why not? She crossed her arms. We present as a united front. We're cordial in public. We support each other. We demonstrate that Clara is in a stable, loving home. What else do they need? Affection. Intimacy. The appearance of a real marriage. The word intimacy hung between them like a challenge. Eliza's expression didn't change. I can be affectionate in public, Your Grace. I'm a better actress than you think. Victor. What? In private, at least, call me Victor. Your Grace sounds like I'm employing you. Aren't you? The accuracy stung. This is a partnership, not employment. A partnership where one partner holds all the power and the other hopes she's made the right gamble. Eliza's voice was steady, but he heard the edge underneath. Let's not pretend this is equal, Victor. She was right. Of course she was right, but the bluntness of it still landed like a blow. "I'm trying," he said quietly, "to make this bearable for both of us." "Then stop treating me like I'm going to shatter if you're honest with me." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her blue eyes. "I know what this is. I knew when I agreed. But if we're going to survive the next 5 weeks, the hearing, the scrutiny, all of it, then we need to actually talk to each other, not dance around the truth." "What truth?" "That you're terrified of losing Clara. That this whole thing is about protecting her, not just her inheritance. That you actually care, even though you pretend not to." Victor's breath stopped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Her voice softened. "I saw your face when she smiled tonight. You looked like someone had given you something you didn't know you wanted." He should have stepped back, should have shut this down, reinforced the walls, reminded her that emotions were liabilities. Instead, he heard himself say, "She's all I have left of my sister." The admission cracked something open inside his chest. Eliza's expression shifted. Not pity, thank God, but understanding. "Then we'll make sure you keep her," she said simply, "whatever it takes. Even if it means pretending to love me in front of a courtroom full of strangers, even then." She paused. "Though for the record, I'm a terrible liar, so you might want to give me something real to work with." "Like what?" "Tell me about your sister, about Clara's mother. If I'm going to convince people I belong in this family, I should know something about it besides financial statements and legal briefs." Victor's first instinct was refusal. He didn't talk about Emily, hadn't spoken her name aloud since the funeral, but Eliza was looking at him with those steady eyes, waiting, not pushing. "She was younger than me by 3 years," he heard himself say. "Reckless, brilliant, everything I wasn't." His throat tightened. "She married a man I warned her against. He was charming, careless with money, couldn't keep a promise if his life depended on it. But she loved him anyway. And he loved her, in his way. Not enough to stop gambling. Not enough to be there when Clara was born. Not enough to—" He stopped, the anger still raw even after months. When Emily got sick, he couldn't handle it. He disappeared for weeks at a time, left her alone with a toddler and medical bills they couldn't pay. How did she die? Fever. It should have been treatable, but by the time I found out how bad it was too late. Victor's hands clenched. Her husband followed 4 months later. Carriage accident, drunk, probably. Left Clara with nothing but debts and a trust fund she can't access for another 10 years. And Edmund saw an opportunity. Edmund always sees opportunities. He's a vulture in expensive clothes. Victor's voice hardened. He'll bleed that estate dry and leave Clara penniless. I won't let that happen. We won't let that happen, Eliza corrected quietly. The shift from I to we did something strange to his pulse. Why are you helping me? The question came out rougher than he intended. Really? Not the money. I know you needed that. But you could have walked away after meeting Clara, could have demanded different terms. Why stay? Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then, because I know what it's like to be invisible. To stand in a room full of people and understand that no one sees you as human, just as potential, or problem, or inconvenience. She met his gaze. Clara deserves better than that. And maybe I can help give it to her. That's all? That's enough. But Victor saw something else in her expression, something vulnerable she was trying to hide. Before he could push, she turned away, back to the bookshelves. It's late, she said. I should sleep. Long day tomorrow, I'm sure. Eliza. She stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, he said. For tonight, for Clara, for all of it. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. You're welcome. She left through the main door instead of the connecting one, putting distance between them. Victor stood alone in the library and tried to remember why he'd thought marrying a stranger was a good idea. Because it was tactical, strategic, necessary. Except it was starting to feel like something else entirely, and that terrified him more than any courtroom. The letter arrived 3 weeks before the hearing, delivered by a messenger who refused to wait for a reply. Victor read it in his study while Eliza sat across from him, watching the color drain from his face. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the paper like it might catch fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. Edmund's attorneys have filed an amended petition. They're not just challenging my guardianship anymore. What are they challenging? The marriage. Our marriage. He looked up, and Eliza saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine fear. They're claiming it's a fraud, that we married solely to circumvent the court's concerns about my bachelor status, and that the union is unconsummated and therefore invalid. The word unconsummated hung in the air like smoke. Eliza's stomach dropped. Can they do that legally? If they can prove it, yes. An unconsummated marriage can be annulled, which would put us back where we started. Me as a single guardian, unfit in the court's eyes. Victor's jaw tightened. Edmund's investigators have been watching us. They know we occupy separate wings, that we barely speak outside of meals, that I haven't touched you since the wedding. So what do they want? Witnesses to... She couldn't finish the sentence. They want doubt. They'll argue that no real marriage looks like ours, that we're play acting for the court's benefit. He stood, paced to the window. And they're not wrong. The admission stung more than it should have. Eliza stood as well, her hands clenched at her sides. So we changed the performance. We're more affectionate in public. It won't be enough. Edmund's people will be looking for cracks. They'll question servants, examine our routines, dissect every interaction. He turned to face her. We need to be more than convincing. We need to be unassailable. What are you suggesting? The silence stretched. Victor's expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the windowsill. The hearing is 3 weeks away, he said finally. If we're going to sell this as a genuine marriage, we need to live like we're genuinely married, not just in public, in private too. Eliza's pulse kicked. You want to share rooms? I want the servants to believe we're sharing rooms. I want anyone watching this house to see a couple who actually lives as husband and wife. He paused. Which means the connecting door between our chambers stays unlocked. We take meals together. We're seen together consistently, not just at dinner. That's still just performance. Better performance than what we've been doing. His gaze was steady. Unless you have a better idea. She didn't. That was the problem. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that proximity to Victor Blackthorne would complicate things in ways she wasn't prepared for. But what choice did she have? Fine, she said. We'll play the happy couple. But there are boundaries, Victor. I'm not asking you to share my bed, Eliza. I'm asking you to share my life. Visibly. Convincingly. He crossed the room, stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. Can you do that? Can you? Something flickered in his expression. Challenge accepted. I suppose we'll find out. That night, Eliza stood in her bedroom staring at the connecting door. It was unlocked now, just a thin barrier of wood between her space and Victor's. She could hear him moving around on the other side. Footsteps, the rustle of fabric, the clink of glass on wood. She'd agreed to this. To the charade, the proximity, the risk of it all falling apart. A knock on the connecting door made her jump. Come in, she said before she could think better of it. Victor entered, still in his shirt and trousers, his cravat discarded. He looked younger without all the formal trappings, more human. It was unsettling. The staff will expect me to be in here at least part of each evening, he said without preamble. For appearance's sake. I understand. I'll bring work. Stay an hour or two, then return to my own rooms. You can read, write letters, whatever you normally do. We don't have to talk. That sounds perfectly miserable for both of us. His mouth twitched. You have a better suggestion? We could actually talk, like we did in the library that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted. If we're going to pretend to know each other, we should probably actually know each other. Victor looked like he wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He took the chair by the fireplace, stretched his long legs out. What do you want to know? Why did you hate your father? The bluntness of it clearly surprised him. Who said I hated him? You did, just now, with your face. Eliza pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. Every portrait in this house shows men who look like you, and you look at them like they personally offended you. Observant. It's not observation. It's obvious. For a long moment, she didn't think he'd answer. Then, my father believed in legacy above all else. The Blackthorne name, the estates, the title, People were just tools to maintain those things. His voice was carefully neutral. My mother died giving birth to Emily. He remarried within a year, not for companionship, but because he needed a spare heir in case something happened to me. That's horrible. That's aristocracy. Victor's smile was bitter. When Emily was born, he was furious. Another daughter, useless to his plans. He barely acknowledged her existence. When she married against his wishes, he cut her off completely. Wouldn't even see her after Clara was born. And you? I was the heir, the investment. Everything I did was calculated to reflect well on the Blackthorn legacy, including who I married. Eliza's breath caught. You were engaged before, briefly, to a woman my father selected. Impeccable breeding, substantial dowry, absolutely no personality whatsoever. He met Eliza's gaze. She broke it off 3 months before the wedding, said I was cold, unfeeling, exactly like my father. She wasn't wrong. You're not like him. How would you know? Because you care about Clara. Your father wouldn't have fought for her. He would have let Edmund take her and been done with it. Victor was quiet, then so softly she almost missed it. He would have used her, same way he used everyone. The rawness in his voice made Eliza's chest ache. She understood suddenly why he'd built such high walls, why he treated everything like a transaction. It was safer than caring. My father gambles, she said, has for years, started small. Cards, horses, nothing alarming. Then it got worse. He'd disappear for days, come home with empty pockets and emptier promises. She picked at a thread on her nightdress. My mother pretends it's not happening. Smiles at parties, acts like everything's fine, like we're not one bad night away from debtor's prison. Is that why you agreed to this? The marriage? Partly. Mostly because I was tired of being invisible while my family sank. She looked at him. At least this way I'm doing something, even if it's just playing a part. You're not playing a part with Clara. No, with her I'm just me, whatever that is. Victor's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. She asked me today if you were staying, after the hearing, when everything's settled. Eliza's throat tightened. What did you tell her? That I didn't know. That it depended on a lot of things. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But she deserves an answer, Eliza. And so do I. When this is over, when we've won the case and the threat is gone, what happens to us? The question she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd agreed to all of this. I don't know, she admitted. The contract says we separate, live independently, but Clara needs stability, not another person who leaves. I know. The words came out rough. I know that, but I also know that staying in a marriage that's just pretense isn't fair to anyone, including you. What if it's not pretense? The words landed between them like a grenade. Eliza stared at him. What? Victor stood, paced to the window, his back to her. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying, what if it doesn't have to be? What if we actually tried to make this work? Not just for the court, for real. Her heart was hammering now. Victor, we barely know each other. We've been married less than a month. You can't possibly. I'm not talking about love, Eliza. I'm talking about partnership, respect, a life that doesn't feel like we're constantly performing. He turned, and the vulnerability in his face nearly undid her. I'm not good at this, at feelings, at connection. But you make Clara happy. You challenged Mrs. Brennan when anyone else would have cowered. You see through my walls like they're made of glass. That's worth something. Worth what? A real marriage? Victor, you don't even like me. I like you more than I've liked anyone in years. The admission seemed to cost him, and I think, if we're honest, you might feel the same. She wanted to deny it, should have denied it, but the words stuck in her throat because he was right. Somewhere between the library conversation and the shared dinners and the moments watching Clara smile, something had shifted. She'd stopped seeing him as just the harsh duke who'd bought her. Started seeing the man underneath, damaged, trying, terrified of failing the one person he had left. This is a bad idea, she whispered. Probably. We'll make each other miserable. Possibly. And if it doesn't work, if we try and fail, it'll be worse than just maintaining the arrangement. Yes. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. But what if it does work? What if we build something real out of this mess? Eliza looked up at him, this impossible man with his impossible proposition, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. "I need time," she said, "to think, to figure out what I actually want, not just what I agreed to." "How much time?" "Until after the hearing. Let's get through that first. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Victor nodded slowly. "That's fair." He should have left then, should have returned to his room, given her space. Instead, he reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you stopped being invisible the moment you told Mrs. Givens she was cruel to Clara. You just didn't notice. Then he was gone," the connecting door clicking shut behind him. Eliza sat in the sudden silence, her skin still tingling from his touch, and tried to remember how to breathe. The next 2 weeks were a carefully choreographed performance. Victor and Eliza took breakfast together every morning, walked the grounds after lunch, spent evenings in the library, reading separate books in shared silence. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple finding their rhythm. But underneath the performance, something else was building. Glances that lasted too long, hands that brushed and didn't quite pull away. Conversations that started about strategy and ended somewhere dangerously personal. Clara noticed, of course. Children always did. "You're smiling more," she told Eliza one afternoon during lessons. "Both of you." "Am I?" "Yes. And Uncle Victor laughs now, at dinner. He never used to laugh." Eliza's chest did something complicated. "Maybe we're all just settling in. Or maybe you like each other." Clara's smile was sly. "Miss Pritchard says that's how it starts. In the books. The people who argue all the time end up falling in love. Life isn't a book, sweetheart. But sometimes it could be, if you let it, out of the mouths of children." That evening, Eliza found Victor in his study, staring at another letter. His expression was grim. "What now?" she asked. "Edmund's upped the stakes. His attorneys are demanding testimony from the household staff. They want Mrs. Brennan, the maids, anyone who can speak to the nature of our relationship." He tossed the letter onto his desk. "They're going to ask explicit questions about our sleeping arrangements, our interactions, everything. So we prepare the staff. Tell them what to say. They'll see through that. Edmund's people are too good." Victor's hands clenched. "We need the truth to match the story, which means—" He didn't finish, but Eliza understood. "You want to actually share a room, not just pretend. For the next week, leading up to the hearing, so when the staff testifies, they're not lying." His jaw was tight. "I'll sleep in the chair, or the floor. But we need to be seen together, morning and night, no ambiguity." Every rational part of Eliza's brain screamed that this was too far, too much, too dangerous. But the hearing was in 7 days. 7 days to sell the most important lie of their lives. "All right," she said, "but we set rules, boundaries. This is still just for show." "Agreed." That night, Victor brought a blanket and pillow to Eliza's room. True to his word, he took the chair by the fire, leaving her the bed. The arrangement should have been awkward, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt almost normal. They talked in the darkness, about Clara's progress, about the hearing strategy, about nothing important. Eliza fell asleep to the sound of Victor's breathing and woke to find him already gone, the chair neatly arranged like he'd never been there. They fell into a rhythm, nights spent in shared space, days spent building their case. And slowly, without meaning to, Eliza started to forget it was all pretense. The night before the hearing, neither of them slept. Victor sat in his usual chair while Eliza paced the room, her mind racing through every possible question, every angle Edmund's attorneys might take. "We're going to lose," she said finally. "They'll tear us apart, and we'll lose Clara." "We're not going to lose." "You don't know that." "No, but I know we're not giving up." Victor stood, crossed to her, caught her hands. "Eliza, look at me." She did. His eyes were steady, certain. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. We tell the truth, that we married for practical reasons, but we're building something real. That Clara is loved, safe, thriving. That we're a family, even if we started as a transaction." His grip tightened. "And if they don't believe us, then we fight harder." "What if fighting isn't enough? Then we make it enough." He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into the strength he was offering. "You're the bravest person I know, Eliza Blackthorne. Don't stop now. The use of her married name, their name, sent a shiver through her. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I. The honesty broke something open. Eliza looked up at him, saw her own fear reflected back, and made a choice. She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't strategic, just a collision of fear and need and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Victor froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands tangled in her hair, hers fisted in his shirt, and for a moment the hearing, Edmund, all of it disappeared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor's forehead rested against hers. That wasn't for show, he said roughly. No, it wasn't. Eliza. A knock on the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Mrs. Brennan's voice came through the wood. Your Grace? Forgive the interruption, but there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent. Victor's expression hardened. Who? Lord Edmund Ashford, Your Grace. He's waiting in the drawing room. The blood drained from Eliza's face. He's here? Now? The night before the hearing? Victor was already moving, grabbing his jacket. Stay here. Absolutely not. Eliza followed him into the hall. If this concerns Clara, I'm part of it. Eliza, we're in this together, remember? Whatever he wants, we face it together. For a moment she thought Victor would argue. Instead, he nodded tersely. Together. But let me do the talking. They found Edmund in the drawing room, perfectly at ease in a chair that should have swallowed him. He was younger than Eliza expected, handsome in a practiced way, with cold eyes that tracked their entrance like a predator watching prey. Cousin. Edmund's smile didn't reach his eyes. And the new Duchess. How charming. What are you doing here, Edmund? Victor's voice was ice. Delivering a courtesy. Professional respect between family members, you understand. Edmund crossed his legs, utterly relaxed. I wanted to give you one final opportunity to settle this reasonably, before we step into that courtroom tomorrow and I destroy everything you've built. We're not settling anything. Are you certain? Because my attorneys have prepared quite the case. Testimonies from your former servants about your cold nature, your temper. Medical records from your sister detailing the family history of instability. And of course, extensive documentation of this. He gestured vaguely at Eliza. Sudden marriage to a penniless nobody. Eliza's hands clenched, but Victor's expression didn't change. Like, you have nothing, Edmund. Just insinuations and desperation. I have enough to create doubt, and doubt is all I need. Edmund leaned forward. Here's what I'm offering. You withdraw your guardianship petition, allow me to assume custody of Clara, and I'll see that you receive generous visitation rights. The child will be cared for, the estate will be managed properly, and you can return to your solitary existence without the burden of playing father to a grieving orphan. No. Think carefully, Victor. You're a bachelor who married a stranger weeks before a custody hearing. That doesn't look like love. It looks like fraud. And when the court sees through this charade, you'll lose anyway. This way, at least you maintain some dignity. Get out of my house! Edmund's smile sharpened. Still the stubborn fool, just like your father. He stood, straightened his cuffs. Tomorrow, then. I look forward to watching you crumble. He headed for the door, then paused beside Eliza. Tell me, Duchess, was the money worth it? Selling yourself to a man who'll never love you, for a child who isn't even yours. His voice dropped. Because tomorrow, everyone in that courtroom will know exactly what you are. And it won't be pretty. Eliza's vision went red. Before Victor could stop her, before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. You want to know what I am, Lord Ashford? I'm the woman who's going to stand beside my husband tomorrow and watch you lose. Because unlike you, I actually care about that little girl upstairs. Not her money, not her inheritance, her. And when the court sees the difference between someone who wants to protect Clara and someone who wants to profit from her, you won't stand a chance. Edmund's expression darkened. Brave words from a purchased bride. Brave words from someone who knows what real family looks like. You wouldn't recognize it if it fell on you. For a heartbeat, Edmund looked like he might say something vicious. Then he laughed, cold and sharp. Tomorrow, he said again, and left. The front door slammed. Silence crashed down. Eliza was shaking, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Victor stood frozen, staring at her like he'd never seen her before. What? She demanded. What was I supposed to do? Let him… Victor kissed her. Hard, desperate. Nothing like the careful touch from before. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he said roughly. You just declared war on one of the most dangerous men in England. He threatened our family. Our family. Victor's hands framed her face. You said our. Eliza's breath caught. She had, without thinking, without planning. I meant it, she whispered. I don't know when it happened, but I meant it. Eliza. A crash from upstairs cut him off. Then a scream. Clara's scream. They ran. The nursery door was open, swinging in the draft. Inside, Miss Pritchard lay on the floor, a gash on her temple bleeding freely. The window was shattered, and Clara was gone. On the floor, held down by a rock, was a note in Edmund's handwriting. The girl is safe. For now. Withdraw by morning, or I can't guarantee what happens next. Victor's roar of fury shook the walls, and Eliza, staring at the empty room where a little girl should have been sleeping, felt everything inside her turn to steel. They'd just made their first mistake, underestimating what she'd do to protect her family. Victor's hands were shaking as he held Edmund's note. Eliza had never seen him shake before. Not during their wedding, not during any of Edmund's threats, not even when discussing his sister's death. But now, staring at those words, his entire body trembled with rage so profound it seemed to warp the air around him. I'll kill him, Victor said, his voice barely human. I'll find him, and no. Eliza grabbed his arm, her grip iron hard despite her own terror. That's exactly what he wants. You lose your temper, do something reckless, and tomorrow morning you look like the unstable guardian he's been painting you as. He took Clara. He broke into my house and took a child. I know, her voice cracked. I know, Victor, but we can't fall apart. Not now. Miss Pritchard groaned from the floor. Eliza dropped to her knees beside the governess, pressing her handkerchief to the bleeding wound. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. I tried to stop them, Miss Pritchard whispered. 2 men. They came through the window. I screamed, but one of them hit me and… Her face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I failed her. You didn't fail anyone. Eliza's hands were gentle even as her mind raced. How long ago? 10 minutes? Maybe 15? Everything's fuzzy. 15 minutes. Edmund could be anywhere by now. But he'd left a note, which meant he wanted Victor to know. Wanted him panicked, desperate, willing to concede. Eliza stood, her mind crystallizing around a single, terrible certainty. He won't hurt her, she said. Victor's head snapped toward her. You can't know that. Yes, I can, because if he hurts her, he loses all leverage. Clara is only valuable to Edmund alive and well. He needs her intact to claim guardianship, to access the estate. She met his wild gaze. This is a bluff, Victor. A brutal one, but a bluff. He's counting on you being too terrified to think straight. Then what do we do? The rawness in his voice nearly broke her. How do we get her back? We call his bluff. Eliza's voice was steady now, cold with purpose. We go to the hearing tomorrow exactly as planned. We walk into that courtroom and we fight. Without Clara, Eliza, they'll use her absence against us. They'll try, but we'll tell them the truth, that Edmund Ashford kidnapped a child to manipulate a custody hearing. She grabbed Victor's face, forced him to focus. We have the note. We have Miss Pritchard's testimony. We have a broken window and a bleeding governess. Edmund just gave us everything we need to destroy him. Victor's breath came in harsh gasps. What if I'm wrong? What if he's not bluffing? What if… Then we still fight. Because giving in guarantees he wins. Fighting gives us a chance. Her thumbs brushed his cheekbones. Trust me, Victor. Please, trust me. For an agonizing moment, he just stared at her. Then something in his expression shifted, the wild panic hardening into something sharper, more controlled. Together, he said hoarsely. Together. They sent for a doctor for Miss Pritchard and stationed footmen at every entrance. Victor dispatched riders to alert the magistrate. Though Eliza doubted it would matter, men like Edmund had ways of evading legal consequences. The rest of the night passed in a haze of preparation and barely contained terror. At dawn, Eliza stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She'd chosen her clothing carefully, a deep green dress that made her look older, more formidable. Her hair was pulled back severely, no softness anywhere. She looked like someone you'd think twice about challenging. She looked like a duchess. Victor appeared in the connecting doorway, dressed in black as always, his face a mask of controlled fury. "The carriage is ready," he said. "Have you slept at all?" "Have you?" Neither of them had. They'd spent the hours strategizing, going over every possible question the court might ask, every angle Edmund might exploit. Now, in the gray morning light, exhaustion sat heavy on both of them, but they couldn't afford to show it. The ride to the courthouse was silent. Victor's hand found Eliza's somewhere between Thornhill and London, his fingers lacing through hers with desperate pressure. She squeezed back, neither of them speaking, both understanding that words were inadequate for what they were about to face. The courthouse loomed like a cathedral of judgment, all stone columns and severe architecture designed to make people feel small. A crowd had gathered outside, curious society members, gossip-hungry matrons, everyone who'd heard whispers of the scandalous custody battle between the Duke of Thornhill and his cousin. They parted like water as Victor and Eliza approached, whispers following in their wake. "Where's the child?" "Did you hear about the marriage?" "My cousin's maid says they sleep in separate wings." Eliza kept her chin up, her hand steady in Victor's. Let them stare, let them whisper. In an hour, they'd have something real to talk about. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed light and hope in equal measure. The judge's bench dominated the front, imposing, elevated, designed to remind everyone who held power here. Edmund was already seated with his attorneys, 3 severe men in expensive suits who looked at Victor and Eliza like insects they were about to crush. Edmund himself looked perfectly composed, relaxed even, like a man who'd already won. Eliza wanted to claw his eyes out. They took their seats. Victor's attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Bartholomew, leaned over. "Where is the child?" he hissed. Her presence was critical to establishing. "She's been kidnapped," Victor said flatly, "by Edmund, last night." Bartholomew's face went white. "You can't be serious. If you're making an accusation like that without proof, we have proof." Eliza pulled the note from her reticule, handed it over. "And a witness." Edmund broke into Thornhill Abbey and took Clara to prevent her from testifying to her own happiness in our household. The attorney read the note, his expression shifting from shock to something that might have been hope. "This changes everything," he breathed. "If we can prove Edmund orchestrated this, we can prove it," Eliza said with more confidence than she felt. "We will prove it." The judge entered, an elderly man with a face like weathered granite. Everyone rose. The formalities began, dry legal language that scraped against Eliza's nerves like sandpaper. Then the judge's gaze landed on their table. "I see we're missing a party to these proceedings," he said, his voice sharp. "Where is the child, Miss Clara Thornfield?" Victor stood. "Your Honor, last night my home was broken into. My niece was forcibly removed from her bed by 2 men acting on behalf of Lord Edmund Ashford. We have physical evidence and witness testimony to support this claim." The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! I will have order!" He glared at Edmund's table. "Lord Ashford, how do you respond to this accusation?" Edmund rose, all wounded innocence. "Your Honor, this is a desperate fabrication from a man who knows his guardianship is about to be revoked. I have no knowledge of any kidnapping. The child is likely hidden away by the Duke himself to delay these proceedings." "That's a lie," Victor snarled. "Your Grace, contain yourself." The judge's eyes were hard. "These are serious allegations on both sides. I want evidence now." Mr. Bartholomew stood, presenting the note, Miss Pritchard's signed statement, the doctor's report on her injuries. Edmund's attorneys countered with claims of forgery, of Victor staging the entire incident, back and forth, accusations and denials, until Eliza's head was spinning and her hands were clenched so tight her nails drew blood. Then Edmund's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, regardless of these unsubstantiated claims, the core issue remains. The Duke's marriage is a transparent attempt to circumvent this court's concerns about his bachelor status. We have testimony from household staff confirming that His Grace and his new wife maintain separate bedchambers, rarely interact beyond formal meals, and show no genuine affection toward one another." "That's not true," Eliza said, the words escaping before she could stop them. The judge's gaze swung to her. "I beg your pardon?" "I said that's not true, Your Honor." Eliza stood, her legs somehow steady despite the terror coursing through her. "May I speak?" Victor's hand shot out, caught her wrist. "Eliza, don't. Let her speak," the judge said. "I want to hear from the Duchess." Eliza pulled free from Victor's grip, stepped forward. The entire courtroom was staring at her. The nobody who'd married a duke, the desperate woman who'd sold herself for her family's debts. She could see the judgment in their eyes, the certainty that she was exactly what Edmund's attorneys claimed. A fraud. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clearer than she'd expected. "It's true that my marriage to Victor began as a practical arrangement. He needed a wife to strengthen his custody claim. I needed financial security for my family. Neither of us pretended it was a love match." Murmurs rippled through the room. Victor's face had gone pale. But what started as transaction became something else. Because Clara needed more than just a roof over her head and a guardian who could afford her upkeep. She needed a family, people who actually saw her, who cared whether she was happy or just convenient. Eliza's throat tightened, but she pushed on. Victor could have chosen any woman in London, someone with impeccable breeding, substantial dowry, all the things his world values. Instead, he chose me, a nobody with nothing to offer except a willingness to fight for that little girl. And I have fought, every single day. Not because it was contractually required, but because Clara deserves people who put her first. "Duchess Blackthorne," the judge interrupted. "This is very touching, but it doesn't address the allegations about the nature of your marriage." "Doesn't it?" Eliza's voice hardened. "You want to know if my marriage is real? If Victor and I love each other? I don't know. We've been married barely a month, but I know that when Edmund Ashford walked into our home last night and threatened everything we'd built, my first thought wasn't about the contract or the money or any of the practical reasons I agreed to this. It was about protecting my husband and Her voice broke. "My daughter, because that's what Clara has become to me. Mine to protect." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "Lord Ashford wants you to believe we're frauds," Eliza continued, steadier now. "That we're play-acting for your benefit. But fraud is what he's committing. Kidnapping a child, terrorizing a household, all so he can get his hands on money he didn't earn and doesn't deserve. And the truly horrifying part? He's counting on you to help him do it. To be so focused on whether Victor and I share a bed that you'll miss the fact that an 8-year-old girl is being held somewhere by a man who sees her as a bank account with a pulse." "Your Honor," Edmund's attorney objected, "this is inflammatory rhetoric. Where is she?" Eliza turned to face Edmund directly. "Where's Clara? If you're so innocent, if this is all fabrication like you claim, then where is she right now?" Edmund's mask slipped, just for a second, but enough. A flash of anger, of being cornered. "I have no idea," he said coldly. "Perhaps the Duke should be asked that question." "I'm asking you," Eliza shot back, "because you know you took her, and every minute you pretend otherwise is another minute that child spends terrified and alone." "Your Honor, I must insist." "Enough!" The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "Lord Ashford, I am ordering you to produce the child within the hour. If she is in your custody, voluntary or otherwise, you will bring her to this courtroom immediately." "Your Honor, I cannot produce what I do not have." "Then you will submit to a search of your properties. All of them, starting now." The judge's expression was granite. "Bailiff, dispatch constables to Lord Ashford's London residence and his country estate. I want every room searched." Edmund's composure finally fractured. "This is outrageous. You cannot simply—" "I can and I am. These proceedings are adjourned until the child is located." The gavel came down. "And Lord Ashford, if I discover you have been lying to this court, there will be consequences far beyond the scope of this custody case." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Edmund was shouting at his attorneys, reporters were scrambling for the doors, and Victor was on his feet, his hand finding Eliza's. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice stunned. "I stopped letting him control the narrative," Eliza said, her own shock catching up with her. "I told the truth." "You just painted a target on your back. Edmund will destroy you for that." "Let him try." She met his gaze. "We're not backing down, Victor. Not now. Not ever." Something blazed in his eyes. Pride, terror, something that looked dangerously close to love. Before either of them could speak, Mr. Bartholomew rushed over. "Your Graces, this is... I've never seen..." He was nearly incoherent with excitement. "The judge actually ordered a search. If they find Clara in Edmund's custody, he'll be arrested. The case will collapse. You'll win by default." "If they find her," Victor said grimly. "They'll find her," Eliza insisted, trying to believe it herself. "Edmund's arrogant, but he's not stupid. He would have stashed her somewhere connected to him, somewhere he could access easily. His properties are the logical place to start." The next 2 hours were agony. They waited in a private room adjacent to the courtroom, neither eating nor drinking, just existing in a state of suspended terror. Victor paced like a caged animal. Eliza sat perfectly still, her mind running through every possible outcome, every way this could go wrong. When the door finally opened, they both jumped. A constable entered, his face carefully neutral. "Your Graces, we've located the child." Eliza's vision went white at the edges. "Where? Is she hurt?" "She's unharmed, Your Grace. Frightened, but unharmed. She was found in a locked bedroom at Lord Ashford's country estate, guarded by 2 men who have been taken into custody." The constable's expression hardened. "Lord Ashford is being detained on charges of kidnapping and obstruction of justice." Victor made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His knees actually buckled. Eliza caught him, and for a moment they just clung to each other, relief and residual terror shaking through them both. "Where is she now?" Victor managed. "Clara, where?" "Being brought here, Your Grace. Should arrive within the quarter hour." The constable left. Eliza and Victor stood in the sudden silence, neither quite able to process what had just happened. "You were right," Victor said hoarsely. "You called his bluff, and you were right. I was terrified I was wrong." "But you weren't." He pulled back, his hands framing her face. "You magnificent, impossible woman. You just saved everything." "We saved everything. Together." The word hung between them, weighted with new meaning. Before Victor could respond, another knock came. This time it was Mr. Bartholomew, his face split in an uncharacteristic grin. "They're reconvening the court. The judge wants to rule immediately." They returned to the courtroom to find it packed. Word had spread. The Duke's cousin arrested, the child found, the whole scandalous mess reaching its climax. Edmund's table was empty, his attorneys conferring in tight, angry clusters. The judge entered, and this time, when everyone rose, the energy was different, expectant, almost hungry. "I have reviewed the evidence presented today," the judge began, his voice carrying across the sudden silence, "including the testimony of the constables who located Miss Clara Thornfield in Lord Edmund Ashford's unlawful custody. The facts are clear. Lord Ashford orchestrated the kidnapping of this child in an attempt to manipulate these proceedings and secure guardianship for financial gain." He paused, his gaze finding Victor and Eliza. "While I have concerns about the rushed nature of the Duke and Duchess of Thornhill's marriage, I cannot ignore the evidence of their genuine care for the child's welfare. The Duchess's testimony demonstrated a depth of commitment that cannot be fabricated, and the Duke's conduct throughout this ordeal, while passionate, has been focused entirely on protecting his niece." Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear. "Therefore, it is my ruling that guardianship of Miss Clara Thornfield be awarded to Victor Blackthorne, Duke of Thornhill, and his wife, Eliza Blackthorne, Duchess of Thornhill, effective immediately. Lord Edmund Ashford's petition is denied, and I am referring his conduct to the criminal courts for prosecution." The gavel came down like a gunshot. They'd won. The courtroom erupted, but Eliza barely heard it. She turned to Victor and found him staring at her with an expression she couldn't name. Disbelief? Gratitude? Something that made her chest ache. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it." His voice was rough. "Eliza, you—" The doors burst open. Clara ran through them like a small hurricane, her hair wild, her dress torn, but her face was blazing with relief and fury, and something that looked like hope. "Uncle Victor!" she screamed. Victor dropped to his knees and caught her as she launched herself at him, wrapping his arms around her so tight Eliza was afraid he'd break her. Clara was crying, words tumbling out between sobs. "They took me. They wouldn't let me leave. I was so scared. I thought... "You're safe now," Victor choked out. "I've got you. You're safe." Clara pulled back just enough to look around wildly. "Where's Eliza? I'm here." Eliza knelt beside them, and Clara immediately threw herself at her too, tiny arms wrapping around her neck with desperate strength. "You came for me," Clara sobbed into her shoulder. "You came for me." "Of course we did, sweetheart. Of course we did." And there, in the middle of a courtroom full of strangers and enemies, the three of them held each other and let the world see exactly what they'd become. A family. Not perfect, not traditional, but real. When they finally pulled apart, Clara looked between them with those enormous amber eyes. "Did we win?" she asked tremulously. "Am I staying with you, both of you?" "You're staying with us," Eliza confirmed, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Forever, if you'll have us." Clara's smile could have lit the entire courthouse. Outside, the crowd had grown. Reporters shouted questions, society matrons craned for a glimpse, the whole spectacle of public scandal on full display. But as Victor lifted Clara into his arms and Eliza took his free hand, walking together toward their carriage, something shifted in the crowd's energy. The whispers changed. "Look at them. The way he holds her. Did you hear what the Duchess said in there about fighting for the child?" Maybe it's real after all. Let them wonder, Eliza thought. Let them talk. They'd earned their truth the hard way. The ride back to Thornhill was nothing like the tense silence of the morning. Clara sat between them, holding both their hands, talking nonstop about her ordeal, and how brave Miss Pritchard had been, and how the men who'd taken her had been scary but also kind of stupid because they'd let her keep her doll. Victor listened with fierce attention, asking questions, making sure she was truly all right beneath the brave words. And Eliza watched both of them and felt something settle into place inside her chest. This was what she'd been fighting for, this exact moment. When they arrived at Thornhill, the staff was waiting. Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Graves, every maid and footman lined up to welcome them home. As Victor carried Clara up the steps, Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, her stern face softened into something almost gentle. "Welcome home, Miss Clara," she said. "We were quite worried." Then, to Eliza's absolute shock, the housekeeper dropped into a deep, respectful curtsy. "Your Grace, you did well today. Very well indeed." It wasn't an apology. Mrs. Brennan probably didn't know how to apologize, but it was acknowledgement, respect. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, after Clara had been bathed and fed and tucked into bed with both of them sitting beside her until she fell asleep, Victor and Eliza finally found themselves alone in the library. The fire was dying, casting long shadows across the walls. "She'll have nightmares," Victor said quietly. "What she went through, it'll stay with her. Then we'll be there when she wakes up, every time." Eliza poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed him one. "We'll get her through it." "We." He took the glass but didn't drink, just studied her face in the firelight. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "Is it?" He set the glass down, moved closer. "Earlier you said you didn't know if we loved each other, that we'd only been married a month." "Yes. Do you still not know?" Eliza's breath caught. She could deflect, joke, retreat behind the safety of ambiguity, but they'd promised honesty, to Clara, to the court, to each other. "I know that when Edmund took her, my first thought was how to get her back to us. Not to you. To us." She met his gaze. "I know that standing in that courtroom, I wasn't acting. I meant every word. And I know that right now, looking at you, I don't want this to be temporary anymore." Victor's expression was unreadable. "What do you want it to be?" "Real, messy, complicated, everything we said it wouldn't be." She laughed shakily. "I want to fight with you about Clara's education and whether she should learn to ride astride instead of side saddle. I want to fix this broken house and make it feel like a home. I want—" Her voice dropped. "I want to try. Actually try. Not for the courts, not for appearances, for us." The silence stretched. Then Victor closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her face. "I fell in love with you in a courtroom," he said roughly. "Watching you stand there and rip Edmund apart with nothing but words and courage. Watching you claim Clara as yours, as ours, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't plan it, didn't want it. But there it is." Eliza's heart stopped. "Victor, you terrify me, Eliza Blackthorne. You walked into my ordered, controlled life and turned it completely upside down. You make me feel things I spent 30 years learning not to feel. You make me hope, which is possibly the most dangerous thing anyone's ever done to me. Is that a complaint? It's a confession. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you. Completely. Inconveniently. With no idea how to do it properly. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of our lives figuring it out. The tears came then, hot and fast, because this impossible, damaged, beautiful man was choosing her. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to. I love you too, she whispered. Even though you're stubborn and controlling and you glower at people instead of talking to them. I love you anyway. That's terrible criteria for a marriage. Good thing we're already married then. He kissed her, and this time there was no performance, no audience, no strategy, just them. Just this moment they'd fought so hard to reach. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor's smile was soft in a way she'd never seen. So, he said, we're really doing this, building a real marriage, a real family. We're really doing this. Eliza took his hand, laced their fingers together. Together. Together, he agreed. And for the first time since this whole impossible journey began, Eliza felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Hope, Eliza discovered over the following weeks, was a dangerous thing to build a life on. It made you vulnerable, made you believe that winning one battle meant the war was over. She should have known better. The first letter arrived 3 days after the hearing. Eliza found it on the breakfast table, sealed with wax she didn't recognize. Victor was outside with Clara, teaching her to ride the pony he'd purchased despite his earlier protests. Through the window, she could hear Clara's delighted squeals and Victor's patient instructions, and the sound made her chest warm. She opened the letter. Congratulations on your victory, Duchess. How unfortunate it would be if certain financial irregularities in your father's past were to come to light. Debts paid with questionable funds, gambling markers sold to unsavory parties. The kind of scandal that might make the court reconsider the character of those raising young Clara. Withdraw from London society quietly, and these details remain private. Continue to flaunt your undeserved triumph, and I'll ensure the Whitmore name, and by extension yours, becomes synonymous with fraud. You have 1 week to decide. No signature. But Eliza knew Edmund's handwriting by now. Her hand shook as she set the letter down. Of course he wasn't done. Men like Edmund didn't accept defeat. They regrouped, found new ammunition, struck from different angles. And he'd found the one vulnerability she couldn't protect, her family's past. Because he wasn't wrong. Her father's debts had been paid by Victor, yes, but some of those debts had originated from transactions that wouldn't survive scrutiny. Markers sold to moneylenders her father shouldn't have been dealing with. Sums borrowed against property he didn't fully own. Nothing criminal, exactly, but enough to raise questions. Enough to taint. You're up early. Eliza jumped. Victor stood in the doorway, windblown and smiling in a way that still surprised her. He looked younger when he smiled, less burdened. Couldn't sleep, she said, shoving the letter into her pocket. His smile faded. What's wrong? Nothing, just restless. She forced brightness into her voice. How's Clara doing with the writing? Fearless. Completely fearless. She'll be jumping fences by next month at this rate. He crossed to her, tilted her chin up. Don't lie to me, Eliza. What happened? She should tell him. They'd promised honesty, promised to face things together, but Victor had just started to relax, to believe they were safe. Clara was healing, laughing again, sleeping through most nights without nightmares. The household had settled into something that almost resembled peace. Eliza couldn't bear to shatter it. Just missing my family, she said quietly. My mother. I should visit them soon. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did miss them, and she did need to visit, to warn them, to figure out how bad the damage could be if Edmund made good on his threat. Victor studied her face, clearly unconvinced, but after a moment he nodded. We could all go. Clara would enjoy meeting your parents properly. No. The word came out too sharp. She softened it. I mean, I should go alone first, prepare them. They weren't exactly thrilled about the circumstances of our marriage initially. Better if I smooth things over before introducing Clara. Another half-truth. Her mother had been ecstatic about the marriage, consequences be damned, but Victor didn't need to know that. All right, he said slowly. When do you want to leave? Today. This afternoon, maybe. I'll only be gone a few days. Now he definitely looked suspicious. But before he could press, Clara burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. Eliza, you have to come see! Buttercup jumped over the log all by herself and I didn't even fall off. The name she'd chosen for the pony, Buttercup, still made Victor wince every time he heard it. But he'd let Clara name it anyway, which was how Eliza knew he was already hopelessly lost to the child. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Eliza said, crouching to Clara's level. I'm so proud of you. Will you come watch? Uncle Victor says I can try the bigger log if you're there. Eliza glanced at Victor, saw the question in his eyes. I'll come watch for a little while. Then I need to take a trip to visit my parents. But I'll be back in a few days, I promise. Clara's face fell. You're leaving? The devastation in those two words nearly broke Eliza's resolve. This was what Edmund was counting on, her inability to bear hurting the people she'd grown to love. Just for a little while, she said gently, and when I come back, we'll have all the time in the world together. Promise? Promise. But as she said it, Eliza felt the weight of Edmund's threat pressing against her pocket, and wondered if it was a promise she could keep. The house Eliza had grown up in looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, and when she knocked, it took 3 tries before anyone answered. Her mother opened the door and for a moment didn't recognize her own daughter. Then her eyes widened. Eliza, oh my dear, come in, come in. We weren't expecting. George, Eliza's here. The familiar chaos of her childhood home wrapped around her like an ill-fitting coat. Her father emerged from his study, looking healthier than he had in years. The permanent worry line between his brows smoothed out by Victor's money and the absence of creditors pounding at the door. Eliza, he embraced her awkwardly. This is a surprise. Is everything well? The Duke, is he? Victor's fine. Everything's fine. The lies were getting easier. I just wanted to visit, see how you were settling in. Her mother ushered her into the parlor, chattering about the latest society gossip. Who'd been invited to what? The scandal of Eliza's courtroom testimony that everyone was still talking about. They're calling you brave, her mother said, eyes shining. My daughter, the Duchess who stood up in court and defended her family. I'm so proud. The pride in her voice made Eliza's stomach twist. Mother, father, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. She pulled out Edmund's letter, handed it to her father. Is this true? About the debts? The questionable transactions? Her father's face went gray as he read. When he looked up, the shame in his eyes told her everything. Some of it, he admitted quietly. Not all, but enough. How bad? Bad enough that if someone wanted to make trouble, they could. The moneylenders I dealt with, they're not the kind who keep pristine records or care about legality, and some of the markers I sold, I may have misrepresented the collateral. You lied, Eliza said flatly. I was desperate. We were going to lose everything. I did what I had to do to survive. The same justification Eliza had used for marrying Victor. The same justification people always used when they made terrible choices. And now those choices were circling back, threatening to destroy everything she'd built. Edmund Ashford is threatening to expose this, she said. Unless I withdraw from London society, disappear quietly. Her mother gasped. That's blackmail. That's strategy, Eliza corrected. And it'll work. If this gets out, the scandal won't just touch you. It'll touch me. And by extension, Victor and Clara. The court could reconsider the custody ruling if they think I have a criminal family background. So, what do we do? Her father asked, and the helplessness in his voice reminded Eliza why she'd spent so many years trying to fix things. Why she'd stood at the edges of ballrooms, hoping for salvation. But she wasn't that invisible woman anymore. We fight, she said. But I need to know everything, Father. Every debt, every questionable deal, every skeleton that Edmund might use against us. No more lies, no more secrets. It took hours. Her father's confession was halting, shameful, but thorough. By the time the sun set, Eliza had a complete picture of the damage, and surprisingly, it wasn't as catastrophic as Edmund had implied. Messy, yes. Embarrassing, certainly, but not illegal. Not quite. Edmund was bluffing again, banking on fear and shame to do what legal action couldn't. I need you to write everything down, Eliza told her father. Every detail. We're going to get ahead of this. How? By telling the truth first, before Edmund can twist it into something worse. She stood, her mind already racing ahead. I'm going back to Thornhill tonight. I'll talk to Victor, and we'll figure out how to handle this. But no more hiding, Father. No more gambling. If we survive this, you're done with all of it. Her father nodded, looking older than she'd ever seen him. I'm sorry, Eliza, for all of it. You shouldn't have had to— I know, she interrupted gently. But I did. And now we deal with the consequences together. The ride back to Thornhill was cold and dark and gave Eliza too much time to think. She'd left that morning planning to handle this alone, to shield Victor from more scandal. But sitting in the carriage, watching the countryside blur past, she realized how foolish that was. They were married, not just on paper anymore, but in truth, which meant his problems were hers, and hers were his. No more secrets. It was past midnight when she arrived. The house was dark except for a single light in the library. Victor, of course. Probably working, unable to sleep while she was gone. She found him at his desk, papers scattered everywhere, a half-empty glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, relief and anger warring on his face. You came back, he said. Of course I came back. Did you? He stood, came around the desk. Because you left this morning like you were running from something. And you've been lying to me, Eliza. I can see it on your face. She could deny it, should probably deny it, but she was so tired of lying. You're right, she said. I have been lying. Edmund sent a letter. He's threatening to expose my father's financial irregularities unless I withdraw from society, and I went home to figure out how bad the damage could be. Victor's expression went very still. And it's bad enough to be embarrassing, not bad enough to be criminal, but Edmund will make it look worse than it is. Use it to question my character, our marriage, the custody ruling. She pulled the letter from her pocket, handed it to him. I thought I could handle it alone, protect you and Clara from more scandal, but I was wrong. He read the letter, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You were going to face this alone, he said quietly, even after everything we've been through, everything we've promised each other. I didn't want to burden you. I'm your husband, Eliza. Your actual husband. Not the contracted version, not the legal convenience. Me, the man who loves you. His voice was rough. Burdens are what we carry together. That's the entire point. The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made her eyes burn. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm not used to having someone to share this with. I've been handling my family's problems alone for so long, I forgot I don't have to anymore. Victor pulled her into his arms, and she let herself collapse against him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and the underlying warmth that was just him. We'll handle this, he said into her hair, together, like we handle everything else. How? The same way you handled Edmund in the courtroom. We tell the truth first. Take away his ammunition before he can use it. Victor pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. I'll have my attorneys prepare a statement detailing your father's financial history. We'll present it as full disclosure, demonstrate that we have nothing to hide. Edmund's threats won't matter if everyone already knows. That'll destroy my family's reputation. Your family's reputation is already damaged, Eliza. This just controls the narrative. His gaze was steady. It'll be uncomfortable. Society will gossip, but scandal fades. And you'll still be the Duchess who stood up in court and fought for her daughter. That's what people will remember. She wanted to believe him, but years of invisibility, of understanding how ruthlessly society judged women who stepped out of line, made her hesitate. What if it affects Clara? What if the court decides, the court isn't going to reverse a ruling based on your father's debts, especially not when Edmund's currently awaiting trial for kidnapping? Victor's smile was sharp. He's grasping at straws, Eliza, hoping you'll panic and give him what he wants. Don't. So we just ignore him? We call his bluff. Again. Victor picked up Edmund's letter, walked to the fireplace, and tossed it into the flames. We live our lives, loudly, publicly, exactly as we've been doing. We show Clara off at society events. We host dinners. We make it clear that we're not ashamed of who we are or where we came from, and we dare Edmund to try to stop us. Eliza watched the letter curl and blacken in the fire, felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He turned back to her. We fight. We don't hide. We protect what's ours. The next week, they hosted a dinner party at Thornhill, their first as a married couple. Eliza sent invitations to everyone who mattered in their social circle, including the most notorious gossips, the most influential matrons, everyone who'd been whispering about their scandalous courtroom marriage. Victor's attorneys had already released a statement about the Whitmore family's financial history. It was frank, unflinching, and positioned Eliza as a woman who'd overcome her family's difficulties through courage and determination rather than trying to hide them. The scandal, as predicted, was immediate and brutal. But so was the support. Lady Pemberton, the same woman who'd mocked Eliza at that first ballroom, showed up at Thornhill's door 3 days before the dinner party with a basket of preserves and an expression that might have been contrition. I misjudged you, she said without preamble. Thought you were a fortune hunter. Turns out you're just practical and braver than most of us. My apologies, Duchess. It wasn't a flowery apology, but coming from Lady Pemberton, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Others followed. Women who'd dismissed Eliza, who'd watched her fade into ballroom corners, suddenly wanted to know her story. Wanted to understand how the nobody had become someone. Eliza told them the truth. Not the sanitized version, but the real one, about desperation and transaction, and how sometimes love grew in the most unlikely soil. By the night of the dinner party, the narrative had shifted. Eliza wasn't a scandal anymore. She was a fairy tale. The invisible woman who'd married the feared duke and turned out to be exactly what his broken family needed. Clara helped with that narrative considerably. The child had insisted on greeting guests at the door, dressed in a new frock that made her look like a small princess. She charmed everyone who entered, talking about her riding lessons and her Uncle Victor's patient teaching and how Eliza had promised to teach her to garden in the spring. Watching her, Eliza felt her throat tighten. This bright, confident child bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed girl she'd met in Victor's drawing room months ago. You did that, Victor murmured, appearing at her elbow. You gave her back her childhood. We did that, Eliza corrected. He smiled, took her hand, and led her into the dining room where their guests were assembling. The dinner was everything Eliza had hoped for. Lively conversation, genuine laughter, the kind of warmth that turned a house into a home. She watched Victor at the head of the table, saw how he'd softened in the months since their marriage, how he actually smiled now when Clara told stories, how he looked at Eliza like she was the answer to a question he'd spent years asking. Halfway through the meal, one of the guests, a friendly earl with too much wine in him, raised his glass. A toast, he declared, to the Duke and Duchess of Thornhill. May your unexpected marriage continue to be unexpectedly perfect. It's not perfect, Victor said before Eliza could respond. It's messy and complicated, and we're still figuring it out, but it's real, and that's better than perfect. The guests laughed, charmed. Eliza met Victor's gaze across the table and saw everything they'd survived reflected back at her. The fear, the fights, the moments of grace that had somehow added up to this. After the guests left, after Clara had been tucked into bed exhausted and happy, Eliza and Victor stood on the terrace looking out over the dark grounds. Edmund's going to try something else, Eliza said quietly. You know that, right? He's not going to just accept defeat. Let him try. Victor's arm was solid around her waist. We've beaten him twice now. We'll beat him again if we have to. You're not worried? I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of living small, of letting fear dictate our choices. He turned her to face him. Edmund's already lost, Eliza. He just doesn't know it yet, because we have something he'll never understand. We actually care about each other, about Clara. That makes us stronger than any strategy he can devise. When did you become an optimist? When I married you. His smile was soft. You're a terrible influence. She laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace into the night, and for the first time in her life, Eliza felt completely, terrifyingly free. The trial came 2 months later. Edmund Ashford faced kidnapping charges, obstruction of justice, and a list of other offenses that the prosecution laid out with methodical precision. Eliza and Victor sat in the gallery, Clara between them, and watched Edmund's careful composure crack under the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the sentence was read, 10 years in prison, forfeiture of his estates, permanent ban from serving as guardian to any minor, Edmund's face went white. His eyes found Eliza across the courtroom, and the hatred there was so pure it should have frightened her. Instead, she felt nothing but pity. He'd gambled everything on cruelty and lost to people who'd gambled on kindness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Victor handled them with practiced ease, giving brief statements about justice served and children protected. But when one reporter asked Eliza directly, "Duchess, do you feel vindicated?" she paused. "No," she said honestly. "I feel sad. For Edmund, for the choices he made, for the fact that he had so many opportunities to do the right thing and chose cruelty every time. But mostly I feel grateful that Clara is safe, that our family is intact, that we get to go home tonight and just live." The quote made every newspaper the next day. Life after the trial settled into something Eliza had never experienced before. Routine. Normal, boring, beautiful routine. Victor managed his estates, Eliza threw herself into improving Thornhill's grounds and establishing a proper household. Clara thrived, her laughter becoming the soundtrack of their days. But it wasn't perfect. Perfect was a lie people told themselves. Victor still had nightmares about losing Clara, woke up reaching for confirmation that she was still there, still safe. Eliza still caught herself bracing for the next disaster, still struggled to believe that happiness could last. And Clara, for all her resilience, had moments where the trauma caught up with her. Sudden fears, clinging episodes, nights when she needed both of them to sit with her until she fell asleep. They were a family built from broken pieces, held together by determination and love that hadn't been part of the original plan. And that was exactly right. One afternoon, nearly a year after the trial, Eliza found herself in the garden with Clara, planting roses that probably wouldn't survive the northern climate, but they were trying anyway. "Are you happy?" Clara asked suddenly, her small hands dirty with soil. Eliza looked at her, this child who'd become hers in every way that mattered. "Yes," she said honestly. "Are you?" Clara nodded seriously. "I used to think happy was something that happened to other people, in books or stories, not to me. And now? Now I think happy is just this, getting dirty in the garden with someone who loves you, having Uncle Victor make terrible jokes at dinner, knowing that when I wake up scared, someone will be there." Clara looked up at her with those amber eyes. "Is that what you think too?" Eliza's throat closed. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what I think." That night, Victor found Eliza in the library, staring at the portrait of his father that still hung over the fireplace. They'd talked about taking it down dozens of times, but somehow it remained, a reminder of the legacy Victor had inherited and chosen to reshape. "Thinking about having it removed?" he asked, handing her a glass of wine. "Thinking about how different our children will grow up," Eliza said, then stopped, realizing what she'd just implied. Victor's hand stilled on his glass. "Our children? She felt her face heat. "I mean, that is, assuming, are you saying you want children with me?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see hope blazing in his eyes. "I'm saying I want a future with you, whatever that looks like." She turned to face him fully. "We've spent so long just surviving, just fighting to keep what we have. Maybe it's time to think about building something new." Victor set down his glass, pulled her into his arms. "I want that. Everything. The future, the children, the fights about how to raise them, all of it. Even the terrible parts? Especially the terrible parts, because they'll be ours." He kissed her forehead. "Eliza Blackthorne, you saved my life. I was so convinced I had to be alone, that caring about people meant inevitable pain. And then you walked into my house and proceeded to destroy every defense I'd built. You made me believe in family again." "You did the same for me." She pressed her hand over his heart, felt it beating steady and strong. "I was invisible for so long, I'd convinced myself it was safer that way, that being seen meant being vulnerable. But you saw me anyway, even when I was trying to hide. I'll always see you. Promise?" "Promise." They stood there at the firelight, holding each other, and Eliza thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing at the edge of a ballroom, convinced her life was already over before it had really begun. That woman wouldn't recognize her now. Wouldn't believe that the harsh duke who'd offered a cold transaction would become the man she loved more than anything. Wouldn't believe that the desperate arrangement would transform into this, a real marriage, a real family, a real life worth fighting for. 2 years later, Eliza stood in the same library, this time with a different portrait being hung. Victor had commissioned it as a surprise, a family portrait showing all of them together. Clara, now 10, stood between Victor and Eliza, grinning with the unselfconscious joy of a child who knew she was loved. Victor's hand rested on Eliza's shoulder, his usual stern expression softened into something almost gentle. And Eliza herself, holding their infant son, looked nothing like the invisible woman from the ballroom. She looked like a duchess, a mother, a woman who belonged. "I look strange," Eliza said, studying her painted face. "You look powerful," Victor corrected. "The artist captured you perfectly. He made me look more confident than I feel. He painted what he saw, what we all see." Victor wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful of the baby sleeping against her chest. The woman who stood up in a courtroom and fought for her family, the woman who turned this cold house into a home, the woman who taught me that strength comes in more forms than I ever understood. Clara, who'd been examining the portrait from different angles, turned around. "Can we hang it here, above the fireplace? So everyone who comes in sees us first, before they see all the old dead people?" Victor's mouth twitched. "The old dead people are your ancestors, Clara. They're still dead, and they all look mean." She pointed at the new portrait. "We don't look mean, we look like a family." "Then that's where it goes," Victor decided. "Right here, the new legacy." They took down his father's portrait together, replacing it with their own. And as Eliza watched the transformation, the cold, disapproving ancestor replaced by their warm, imperfect family, she felt something shift in the house itself, like it was breathing easier, finally allowed to be something other than a monument to duty and coldness. That evening, after Clara was in bed and the baby was sleeping in his cradle, Eliza and Victor sat on the terrace as they often did, watching the stars emerge over the northern countryside. "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked quietly. "Agreeing to marry me? All of this?" Eliza looked at him. This man who'd started as a stranger, become her husband in name, and somehow transformed into her partner in every sense that mattered. "Never," she said. "Even the terrible parts. Even Edmund and the trial and all the fear, because it led here. To this. To a drafty house in the middle of nowhere with a man who still doesn't know how to express feelings properly, and a child who's terrifyingly fearless, and a baby who seems to think sleep is optional? Exactly that." She took his hand. "A year ago, Clara asked me if I was happy, and I said yes. But I didn't understand how much more happiness was possible, how it could keep growing, keep expanding, even when you think you've reached capacity." Victor was quiet for a moment, then, "I used to think my father was right, that caring about people was weakness, that the only legacy worth building was power and wealth and control." He gestured at the house behind them. "But our portrait is hanging in the library now instead of his, and I think that might be the greatest act of rebellion I've ever committed. Choosing love over control, choosing family over legacy, choosing the messy, imperfect present over the pristine, empty past." He pulled her closer. "Choosing you every single day, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." Eliza leaned into him, felt his heartbeat steady against her back, and thought about how far they'd all come. From transaction to truth, from survival to thriving, from invisible to unforgettable. "Tell me something," she said. "That night at the first ballroom, when you asked me to dance, what made you choose me? Really?" Victor was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You looked like I felt, alone in a crowded room, watching life happen to other people. And I thought, here's someone who understands what it's like to be invisible, someone who might not judge me for being so thoroughly broken. I wasn't that broken, neither was I, not really." His arms tightened around her. "We were just waiting for someone to see us. Turns out we saw each other." The stars wheeled overhead. Inside the house, their children slept safely. The servants had banked the fires for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a estate to manage, a household to run, a family to nurture. Normal problems, beautiful problems. The kind of problems Eliza had never imagined she'd be lucky enough to have. "Victor," she said softly. "Hmm? Thank you for choosing me, for that dance, for the proposal, for all of it. Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for fighting." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "For teaching me that invisible just meant I wasn't looking hard enough." They sat there until the cold drove them inside. And even then, they lingered in the hallway, neither quite ready to let the day end. These were the moments Eliza treasured most, the quiet ones, the in-between spaces where nothing dramatic happened, but everything mattered. Years later, when Clara was grown and married herself, she would ask Eliza about those early days, about the courtroom battle and the kidnapping and the impossible transformation from strangers to family. And Eliza would tell her the truth, that love wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't perfect or smooth or anything like the stories. It was choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. It was standing together in courtrooms and on terraces and in gardens, building something real from the wreckage of what might have been. It was a woman who'd spent years invisible, finally being seen. It was a man who'd built walls, learning to let someone in. It was a child who'd lost everything, finding something better. It was a family that shouldn't have worked, but did anyway. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.